Hello, and good afternoon or good morning wherever you are, and welcome to the QEM Heroes webinar series. I'm Christine Wood, and I serve as the Assistant Program Director for the Heroes Fellows Program at QEM. And for more than 30 years, QEM has been a national catalyst for STEM education transformation and research capacity building. Currently, the QEM network serves nearly 900 colleges and universities and reaches more than 8,000 individuals nationwide. This webinar is part of the HEROES initiative. The HEROES program brings together researchers with experience in the federal government to lend their expertise and support to the STEM research and education communities. Our fellows are here to provide tools and tips for navigating the funding landscape, developing STEM programs and partnerships, and improving talent retention in in-demand fields. We hope this series promotes engagement with our HEROES fellows and provides valuable resources to our participants. And as always, this webinar will be available in the QEM Resource Hub, the slides and the recording. By attending this webinar, you will soon be added to the QEM network and granted access to the Resource Hub. And I'm so proud to introduce our HEROES fellows today. Following the early stages of an academic career in particle physics, Dr. Gregory Davis came to Washington as a AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. After his year in the Pentagon, he worked for 16 years at the Institute for Defense Analyses and then a few other government jobs before coming to QEM Network. During his time in Washington, he may have written an undisclosed number of reports on important and fascinating subjects ranging from, well, that information is classified. And Dr. Aprille Ericsson is a trailblazing aerospace engineer known for many firsts. She's the first Senate-confirmed presidential appointee as Assistant Secretary of Defense for Science and Technology, overseeing a $2 billion enterprise. She was also the first African American woman to earn an engineering PhD while at NASA Goddard. A Brooklyn native, Dr. Erickson earned her BS engineering degree from MIT, an ME, and a PhD from Howard University. Passionate about STEM advocacy, she mentors young minorities and women. Honored globally, she remains dedicated to advancing spaceflight and innovation. She continues to inspire future generations through education and leadership. And so, without further ado, I will turn the floor over to our presenters.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Oh, well,
That we're
start off initially with the poll, if I'm correct. Do we change
Yeah,
to
let's
that
do it.
slide? Yep.
I will launch the poll right now.
Okay.
It won't let me vote. Hosts and panelists cannot vote.
We give them a couple of minutes. We're good.
Yep, we have 75% participation. I'm just going to wait to see if we can get our last participant to vote.
Okay. Awesome.
All right, I'll share the results.
Oh, wow. We have it's pretty evenly broken down too. So that's good. A third. All right. So we're actually going to talk a little bit about why should we, yes, thank you. Why should you get a clearance? And we'll actually discuss the differences of the clearance types, and we'll also we understand that many of you often are coming from academia, may not have the interest and don't understand why it should be a good asset to have. So let's start off with, when you get a clearance, what are those clearance types? Greg will also go into them a little bit more in depth, but let's start off with the three that are widely known. We'll just be a little bit more specific about those, but they primarily is the confidential, the secret, and the top secret. It really, the opportunity to have a security clearance has some positive aspects to it. And so in the second bullet there discusses really about how it can enhance your job prospects. Typically, I find that when I've had a clearance, it actually raises the financial level as well to that particular role. It can be helpful in roles in federal, defense, and the private sectors. Then that fourth bullet, if you see, it also, we wanted to give you some of the aspects of having a clearance. What does it require? And in this case, we highlight that it requires a sponsorship, a very thorough background check. You must adhere to the protocols, the very strict protocols. And there is definitely a duration during this process, but it varies from the clearance levels that we've already identified. There are some legal and ethical considerations that you must take into concern. And some of those things that I've even thought in getting my clearances is, what does my social media look like? There are the aspects of, have you ever been arrested? All of those things should be taken into consideration. And we often tell students it's really important to watch those aspects. They often don't realize how their electronic footprint will be there for life. So these are all crucial in obtaining a security clearance. Next slide, please. Let's understand a little bit about the population that really has them. Approximately 4.1 million Americans hold some level of clearance. But when you begin to look at the more highly classified areas, it actually is about half of that, about 2 million in practice. Having the ability to have eligibility for this does not necessarily mean that you will get access. And when people do have access, it doesn't mean that you will necessarily handle all of the sensitive material. It is very discreet in terms of who gets to know what secrets. And that top secret level that I mentioned earlier, the TS, SCI, that is about a quarter of the population that hold a clearance. So anywhere from 1.25 to about 1.3 million. In that population, they may hold access to some very specific and key topic areas like intelligent operations, our advanced military capabilities, nuclear and cryptography type systems, and then highly sensitive geopolitical intelligence as well. Next slide, please. So thinking about what could actually be some of the barriers to getting clearances, and these barriers may actually impact the project of your cycles as well. You know, if you have some introductory phase and period that you need to have your clearance by, you cannot always be sure that you will get it in time. So you look here, this shows the lengthy adjudication timeline, anywhere from 16 to 18 months. And this may affect your hiring cycle, not just in academia, but also in private industry. I see this being an impact. I often see that industry will say, we will hire you, and with the prospect of that you can get through a security clearance because your job may depend on it. There is limited institutional infrastructure in the academic environment for clearance sponsorship and the management of that. We do know that faculty will hire. Hiring often emphasizes what we say open scholarship, meaning that you can pass back and forth information freely. But when you're working on top secret jobs, it may not be the same thing. And I know that that may be a personal discussion that you may need to have, whether or not you want to shift your research to an area that may not be able to share academically across the academic and professoriate. There is an administrative burden, and it can be a little costly at times for institutions to have the ability to issue these. There is a little bit of cost. That process often is attached to the Department of War and often the Office of Personnel Management, DOW and OPM. For me, when I was doing my Senate hearing back in March 2023, fortunately, I already had a secret clearance, but they actually went a step further, reviewed my clearance, and then I went through another review from a different agency. So there are multiple agencies. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that universities are really built on open and global collaboration, but you would end up with somewhat of a restricted and compartmentalized source of information. This may actually also limit how much you can use students, graduate students or undergrad, if they don't have clearances. And we understand that this could create tension when you're trying to get your tenure or trying to work on national security work. Next slide. How might that constraint occur? Well, we do know that for STEM graduate students and postdocs, unfortunately, there is a large portion of non-US personnel. That could be something that is going to create an issue with the blockage of information to those important research members. It could exclude many top researchers in your core project work. The sensitivity of the facilities and data environments are really important to adhere to. And it may limit the partners, the global partners and the allies that you work with. I have been a part of negotiating research initiatives that would include our allies. I still had to put policy into place when I was at the Department of Defense that would allow us to exchange information a little bit more freely, but we had to make sure that it was very secure in the way that we were transferring. So that can be a burden that a university, an academic environment may not be able to take on and did not have the juice, in a sense, to make it happen. We do know there are many multinational programs, though, but if you are in alignment with those, perhaps that might be the best way to seek that clearance and collaboration would be supported through those entities like NATO, the Five Eyes S&T, and other entities as such. Next slide, hon. I do understand how this can be a slowdown for research. It does create bottlenecks. It creates not just at the academic level, but also at the workforce level. We understand that it's already very difficult to find the right researchers to work in critical fields, but then this further will narrow the potential field to the potential population that could work in these fields with sensitive information. I've listed a few here like artificial intelligence, quantum, and microelectronics. At the earlier part of my conversation, I also mentioned that it could delay your project. This might really cause an issue when you start up with your project. And when trying to scale research efforts and trying to get that surge of people on, it really reduces the ability to bring them on quickly. That last bullet there in the top is a fragmentation between classified and unclassified. If you have a gap in knowledge, then that is also limited in what you may be able to do research on. What are those implications strategically? Well, that transition from basic to applied and operational capability, again, is slowed. Um, the innovation may be constrained and limited because you don't have that access to that global talent pool. The diversity, I believe, that is really important, may be limited. And then that last one, you may have to create a parallel ecosystem, but that is not the most optimal way. And it would be cleared versus the open scientists really reduces that opportunity for cross-discipline and a cross-flow of ideas. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to also give you an example because it's not a hopeless situation. There's actually an institution, one of our university affiliated research centers under the Department of War. This is University of Maryland's Applied Research Laboratory for Intelligence and Security, known as ARLIS. It was actually started in 2018. Its focus, as mentioned there, is intelligence and security. and they are considered a long-term strategic partner. There are several university-affiliated research centers around our country. But this one has that very particular focus. So they've done some things to really focus and to allow their teams to have access for national security priorities. Wanted just to note that some of the areas they work in is quantum computing, advanced computing and emerging technologies, intelligent human machine systems, and operational innovation and information. Next slide. They actually have a program under the ARLIS UARC called Research for Intelligence and Security Challenges. Its challenge is a competition for talent for defense and intelligence communities. They have taken on that challenge of really helping to reach and to exceed the demand for employees who hold security clearances. Um, they have a focus to have those entities or people have good academic training and particularly excel in the STEM fields. What risk initiative in trying to fill that gap, one of the things they identified really early is that they needed to have undergraduate and graduate students from across the country who could partner with the ARLIS researchers. It is a 10-week paid, mostly virtual program. Riskers, as they call it, are the researchers that are part of this consortium, the INSURE consortium. They actually work to help sponsor students and faculty members and with the hope and the intent that they would be considered for future employment with the U.S. government. Just to let you know, one other little tidbit that ARLIS holds solicitations regularly for problems that are associated and topics that are associated with the Department of War and the intelligence community. So they are very mission relevant. And so this gives you an opportunity, particularly for our students and researchers, to address problems that are unique to those communities. The mapping there shows some of the institutional partners and the locations that they currently reside. But when students are selected, they are selected from across the nation. All right, Greg, I think that you are up next.
Thank you very much, April.
Mhm.
So this is going to be more of the nuts and bolts. I have been in this environment for a very long time and worked in many different places. You'll see here some of the words will be repeated at multiple meanings, things worth knowing. Unfortunately, my charts are boring, and the reason for that is because of the potential of a security review. And this is training materials, is the way these could be interpreted, at least anyway. And as such, if I were to create my own, I would certainly need to send them through a security review. And in fact, when you have a security clearance, even if you give it up and you leave the national security world and you decide to go and become a calculus teacher, you have made a commitment for the rest of your life in some ways. And you've got the opportunity to send anything you write through security review, and you probably should if it has any relation to classified work at all, to make sure that the government agencies think that it's okay. So what this material is that I'm going to be showing you is all of these come from a particular glossary that's official and out there that you can go and find in the public. And these terms are defined there, and this is the exact definition word for word. So as I said, I started with the security review to point out that my security clearance still influences me and that it also influences what these charts look like. All right, so where does all this come from? Executive Order 13526. What's interesting about this isn't the number, but the fact that the entire security clearance system is based on an executive order. Very little of what we'll talk about comes from law. It all comes from executive orders. And this executive order has been amended or changed or reissued. They keep the same number just so that you can always refer back to the same thing. And it says several things in it. But one of the interesting things to note, because it's an executive order, sometimes you'll see prosecutions of people for espionage, spilling secrets, and so forth. And they don't talk about whether the information was top secret or classified. They don't talk about clearances. They talk about national security and intent and things. And that's because the law is from Congress and in statute. And this is executive order. And it's not illegal to violate an executive order. It's just not doing what your boss told you to do or not doing what you agreed to do. So if they're going to prosecute you, it needs to be based on a law, not executive order. But all the definitions of classified come from here. And one of the other things that's in here, uh, in order to see classified information, you need to be a cleared person and you need to have a need to know, which is often done in a formal way. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go forward. Just having a security clearance does not mean that you can go and look at any piece of classified information that's out there. So these are the definitions of classified information. Confidential information, I'll give you a moment to read this, will cause damage to national security if it's released. And you might think, well, that's a good enough definition for any kind of classified information or classified national security information, but it's not. I'll also point out I put cause damage in blue because that's the color of a cover sheet if you have confidential information on paper. So you need to put a blue cover sheet on it. But then you can put a red cover sheet on secret information, which could cause serious damage to national security. And then you might want to guess what top secret information is. It could cause exceptionally grave damage to national security. So these are not really objective. They are somewhat subjective definitions, but material is classified and someone decided that this thing is top secret and this thing is secret. And occasionally things are confidential. I've seen very little confidential information in my life, but it does exist. I remember the one time I saw it and it's like, oh, interesting. So then there's this other thing, SCI, that people talk about, sensitive compartmentalized information. And technically, most SCI is top secret. Some of it is actually secret, but it's also in these other compartments and it provides an extra protection. SCI is typically from the intelligence community. And when I first think of classified information, what comes to mind is we have this capability. This is how it works, and we don't want the bad guys to figure it out. That's typically not what SCI is. SCI is typically, we learned this about the bad guys. So this is information on how somebody else's sonar system works or how somebody else's airplanes work. Or this is how we collected that information. And we don't want them to know that we know. We don't want them to know how we found out. The fact that we know that somebody else's equipment is several years behind our own, their technology may not be something we're particularly worried about spilling, but we don't want the other country to know what we know about them. That's usually what goes in here. The best protected of our stuff is what Aprille talked about earlier. It's called SAP, Special Access Programs, which is similar to SCI, but that typically refers to our own equipment and our own information. So you think that the area you're working in has some classified information, but you don't know exactly what is classified and how it's classified. There's a security classification guide, and this is a book that will tell you everything you need to know about submarines or everything you need to know about this missile system. And it will say, this information is classified top secret, this information is secret, and it should explain why. And occasionally it may even say that this thing is unclassified and this thing is obviously unclassified, but talking about them together would be secret, so don't do that. So these are very helpful books. And if you're working on a classified problem, you can always ask your sponsor to see the security classification guide. They should give it to you. All right, so let's get into how you become cleared. So the first thing is this term cleared contractor. Now, in and around the government, people routinely say, oh, this person's a Fed, that person's a contractor. That's not what this refers to. A contractor is not a person in this context. A contractor is an institution. So it could be a for-profit company like Northrop Grumman or Boeing. It could be a not-for-profit like RAND Corporation, the Institute for Defense Analyses. It could be a university. It could be a UARC, also the national labs. Those places are all cleared contractors. And if you're not a federal government employee and you want to have a security clearance, you need to be associated with one of these cleared contractors. And a cleared contractor is granted a FCL, that is a facility clearance by a CSA, the Cognitive Security Agency. The most common CSA is the Department of War now, but there are lots of others. In this case, facility doesn't actually mean a place, it means an institution. So the Rand Corporation is an FCL or is a facility in this context. And the next one is a facility security officer. And everywhere I've worked, they have a facility security officer who is responsible for making sure they follow the NISPOM. That's the guidebook for how to run a classified company or a company with clearances. And they are usually a full-time employee at a big place that with a staff. And I've heard it said that in some of the smallest cases that there have been universities where there's only one or two cleared people, and then that one cleared person becomes the FSO. That sounds very difficult to me, and it's been suggested to me that this is not a good path, but it can be done. Just imagine the situation that you are a cleared employee, you go to your kid's hockey game, a fight breaks out, the police show up, some people get arrested, somebody got hurt, and you wind up talking to a police officer and your name's in a police report. Is this something that needs to be reported? I don't know. But you've got to talk to your FSO and figure out whether this is important. And it's nice to have somebody who's really a professional and that's their life to figure out whether that's something you need to deal with and deal with how. So so that may sound like a big problem. You work at small college and you're the only person there who might get a clearance, or maybe you and your postdoc, or you and one student or two faculty members. How are you going to handle this? You want to become a cleared employee. Well, and get your personal security clearance. So the common answer to this is being an employee isn't necessarily exclusive. And academia often has these things with joint appointments, right? A person says, well, I'm a professor at small college and I'm also a researcher at this national lab. And often that's done for security clearance purposes. So if you're working with other people, whether they're at Northrop Grumman or they're at the Institute for Defense Analyses or they're at Los Alamos National Laboratory, if you can create the relationship with them where you're a temporary employee or an unpaid employee or an adjunct employee, a title, something like that, then you can get your security clearance through them. They will have an FSO who probably has a pretty good sized staff, and they will handle all of that stuff for you. And you don't need to worry about the difficulty of trying to turn your institution into a cleared contractor. So that's a path I suspect most people who work at institutions that don't hold clearances should probably be thinking about if they want to get cleared. And the UARC that April talked about earlier is a good example of a place you can do that. And now my last chart, if you want to go get a security clearance, they're going to ask you a whole bunch of questions. You fill out what's known as the SF-86 form, and they will ask you about all of these things, and it's a very long form. So they'll ask you about your allegiance to the United States. They want to be sure that this is the country that you're supporting. And they will ask you about foreign influences. So this could be, and I've seen people have problems with this, if you have relatives who live in other countries, they may ask a lot of questions about that. And sometimes people's clearances have been held up or even denied because of that. And then there's foreign preference. I don't know exactly how this is different than allegiance to the US, but it is a separate guideline, and it's also something that they will ask you about. And then there's sexual behavior. And I'm guessing when this was first put in here that they just felt like certain kinds of people were not to be trusted. It was illegal to be homosexual in the military until the 90s. That's no longer the case anymore. And if there is a good reason why it's still here, it's because they don't want you to be blackmailed. So, and that's also going to be a recurring theme. So if you claim to be one thing, but you're actually hiding it for whatever reason, then that's something that a foreign intelligence agency might be able to use against you. If they figure out that you are hiding something from the world and they know, then they can threaten to release it unless you work with them. So we don't want our people to be pressured like that. So that's, I think, the primary reason why Guideline D exists. Then there's personal conduct. Basically, are you an honest person? Do you do the things you say you're going to do? And so they're going to look for questions about that. They will look at financial considerations, and there's two things to this. The first one is that if you don't have any money, then you might be susceptible to bribery from a foreign power. The other thing is, if you've been living a life a certain way and then you get your clearance and then all of a sudden you become wealthy, then that's suspicious. So they're going to keep an eye on your finances if you have security clearance. And then they look at alcohol consumption because that can make people unreliable. They also look, but you're allowed to drink alcohol. There's no law against it, but they want to make sure that you don't drink it so much that you become unreliable or that you become uh, I guess, blackmailable about it. Illegal drugs, they're more strict about this. They don't want anybody who's been using illegal drugs, who is using illegal drugs. They will ask you if you fill out that form, have you ever used illegal drugs? And my understanding is that it's much better to say that you have, if you have, than not, because uh, you don't need to be perfect. You just need to be good going forward, and they don't want you to be blackmailed over it. So they want you to be honest and tell them the truth in most cases, maybe in all cases, but they are very serious about this. And if you are using illegal drugs while you have a clearance, that can definitely cause a problem. Psychological conditions, well, there are concerns that if you have the wrong kind of condition, that maybe you would be susceptible to spilling secrets, even if you don't want to. So they do check for things like that. The rules on that used to be much stricter. I believe it was the case for many years that if you went to a therapist, you couldn't have a clearance. That is definitely no longer true. But the idea there, the reason they changed it is they said, well, if you have psychological issues, we don't want you to hide them and we don't want you to bottle them up. So yes, you're allowed to go see a therapist, but they certainly want to know and record all that. And then criminal conduct. Again, this seems to me to be a subset of personal conduct, but it's something specific they will ask you about and check on. And then handling protected information. So if you have a track record of not handling protected information properly, then that would go against the idea of you having and keeping a security clearance. And then outside activities, they want to know if you're part of organizations that are terrorist organizations or plotting for the downfall of the United States government and so forth. So that's another thing that they will ask about and check about. And then, yes, the last one, use of IT. So they will look at the way you've used IT, and if you are irresponsible, then you will not be allowed to have security clearance because most classified information is now stored in computers and you need to be responsible when you use them. And there typically are separate computer systems for classified information and unclassified, and even there are within the DOW systems for secret and systems for top secret, and they're separated, and you need to use them correctly. And that's the last of the information that I'm going to share. This is the contact information for Aprille and me, and also for all the QEM stuff going forward. And at this point, we're happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Davis and Dr. Ericsson, for an engaging presentation on security clearances. We are open for questions. We have the chat open, we have a Q&A box open, and you also raise your hand to come off mute.
We should just note too that the quote that we have there, that clearance friction is not just a workforce issue. It really is a strategic constraint on innovation, velocity, and global collaboration. And we understand this, so we are here to help if you have questions.
I have a question that relates back to faculty researchers and may be helpful for faculty researchers to know. So given the DOW gives a large number of security clearances, maybe the majority, how do the new critical technology areas of the Department of War influence prospects for researchers for getting clearances? So will there be more opportunities or demands for faculty with security clearances now that they've reissued the CTAs and there's new priorities within the DOW?
So I would think that if you are practicing research in those critical areas that have been identified, matter of fact, I think that some of our, matter of fact, our host here, Greg, has talked about the CTAs. If you can identify that your research aligns with things like that, then there would be the added push and help and support to get a clearance. I have personal experience with one of the newest UARCs to join our portfolio of UARCs under DOW. That was the READA UARC, which is Research for Institutional Tactical Autonomy. Howard University is the lead institution, and there are 8 other HBCUs under. When they first started off, no one on their team had a clearance, and that was actually very detrimental to them to be able to join in some of the meetings. Myself and my boss, who was the Undersecretary for Research and Engineering, would provide a monthly, well, actually quarterly meeting for all of them to get together. And our intent was for the other UIs to potentially collaborate together, but get to know each other. And then with Howard being such a newbie, we would hoping that one of the other institutions could mentor them. But that was a problem, right? Because we couldn't have them have access to some of the knowledge and the pertinent things that we were trying to share. We also did some solution type opportunities where there were collaborative opportunities for them to work together directly on the type of problems that I mentioned under the University of Maryland R list. However, we identified that it was imperative, like it was really important that tactical autonomy is a huge capability for DOW. And so I put somebody on it immediately so that we could actually streamline the process and make sure that we got somebody on their team with a clearance as possible, as early as possible. And so, yeah, I was able to make that happen.
So everything said, April just said is certainly correct, and the story about Howard and that process is worth knowing. But the CTAs in particular are kind of orthogonal to the security clearance. If you can get a contract with any government agency that requires you to have a clearance, and so the DOW is certainly one of those, then you can get the clearance, and your research might be related to a CTA or it might not. And there are definitely research organizations within the DOW that are doing research that is and is not directly related to the CTAs. So there's no formal connection. But I guess if you're working in something that is one of the CTAs, then it's more likely that you'll find research that relates to that and contracts.
Thank you so much. And we have plenty of time for questions if others would like to chime in. I'll let you
I
know that.
will, Christine, I will mention that I believe, Greg, you still hold your clearance. I know that I do. I have it parked with a company that I was doing some consultant work. And it's really important to me to maintain, just like as Greg mentioned, how important it was for him to still be mindful of his practicing and how he was presenting the information. It's also I'm very mindful of the things that I do because I don't want to impact that. It took quite a while to get it. And so we are always very sensitive to that. But it is an asset. I think it's an asset for our QEM network as well, having people on board that have those clearances.
And in the meantime, while we wait for additional questions, I wanted to point out that on this closing slide, you will see 3 QR codes. One takes you to the QAM events page where you can sign up for future webinars. One takes you to our Heroes webpage where you can learn more about our Heroes Fellows, how to get in touch with them, and what kind of services they provide. And also our webinar feedback form to evaluate this webinar today, which I will put in the chat. Well, without further questions, I wanted to thank everyone for attending today. And as you know, the slides and the recording of this webinar will be available in the QEM Resource Hub, which you will be granted access to for having attended today. And I wanted to thank everyone so much for attending today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.